Looking at what's available, the entirety, let me ask you this, and coaches, for you, can you turn a team around, your team, hypothetically speaking, around in this free agency market?
The way you turn around the quickest is if you can find a quarterback, right? Because he plays with the ball. He makes the most sense. Now, if you're like I keep going back to San Francisco, they need a corner.
Right.
They really do. You get Revis, you're pretty good. All of a sudden, your secondary has become a lot better. You can draft another guy. Now, all of a sudden, you got a secondary complementary to Seattle. Team you have to deal with, okay? And in that division, you got to deal with Fitzgerald, Floyd. Yep. You got to deal with some. So, you know, who's the guy and what type of team do you have? Okay. Free agency is always one of those deals you end up overpaying. Here's the problem with free agency. If he's not the second-year player, you're getting a guy that's in his 30s. Be leery of the guy in his 30s. Because if you overpay him, you're stuck. You don't want to be stuck. He comes in your locker room. Whether you like it or not, he already has some leadership qualities because he's been in the league a long time. You just paid him a boatload of money. When he walks in the locker room, that's great. How does he transfer that on the field? Does he work at it? Is he in the meetings working? Because the young guys are watching him going, oh, we just paid this guy all this money, and all of a sudden, he's not a worker? You got a problem. You got a big problem. Because that guy, all of a sudden, when he walks in your locker room, all those first-year guys on their contract are going, they just paid this guy this money? They're watching him. You got to make sure he's the right guy. You got to make sure he's the right guy now. Because if he's the wrong guy, oh, boy, you got issues with those young guys sitting watching him now.
I am not a fan of what is about to transpire at 4 p.m. today. I think millions upon millions of dollars are about to be misspent, if not wasted, on overpriced free agents who just got rejected by their former team for reasons. Whether it's baggage, declining play, age, whatever it is. Once upon a time, you thought, that guy was really good. And now these are all like, yeah, but they all have buts to them now. So, to me, the way to turn your team around is in this draft that comes up.
Always.
Yeah,
always.
But this is one of the deepest ones in maybe the last decade or so. That's how to score. And I remind you, on this day last year, in the first big salvo of free agency, Mike Wallace got 5 years, $60 million, okay? And it was overspending madness by the Dolphins because he put up career low numbers. He couldn't live up to being the number one, the big guy.
By the way, that's why the GM Ireland is gone as opposed to the whole bullying scandal. The man paid almost $100 million.
That was a bad idea.
Right.
Meanwhile, John Schneider, little known at that point of this team up in Seattle, he sat back and let everybody overspend for several days. And he came in the second wave of free agents. And remember the scores that he made? Cliff Averill, he gave him only 2 years, $13 million. It was a bargain. Like, wait a minute, they got Cliff Averill? And then Michael Bennett, who was the prize of this year, and he just stayed in Seattle, which, congratulations, Seattle.
He deserves it.
Yeah. Well, he got him 1 year for $5 million. He just got $10 million to stay in Seattle. Well, those are scores on sort of the second day. It's like the second or third day of the draft.
That's right.
That's how you score in free agency, but that takes a little wisdom and a little patience.
Well, it does. And here's the problem in free agency, too, and you guys will attest to this. The name of the player doesn't always meet the production anymore.
Yeah.
And there lies the problem. Because you bring in this player with the name, and the fans get all excited. Oh, we got to watch that. But all of a sudden, he ain't the same guy.
Yep. Well said.
He's not the same guy. Right. It's not his fault. It's really not his fault. But the market bears, you got to pay this guy this amount of money to get him in here. The fans get all excited. But he's not the same player anymore.
Well, you're talking to the wrong guy because I am a proponent of these players getting as much as they can.
I am too.
The fact that the NFL makes its billions.
I am too.
But with that being said, I understand where y'all are coming from, and I can't dismiss that. I get where you're coming from, particularly with the Averill or Michael Bennett. I totally get that because Schneider did a great job with that. But I got to tell you something. When I look at this, for example, I look at a guy like Maurice Jones-Drew, workhorse. I look at the New York Jets. I'm like, you need to look at somebody like that. I say you got Chris Ivory up in there, what have you.
Okay, sure you aren't just hanging on to name?
Well, again, I'm looking at a short stocky dude that can carry a load.
Okay.
I'm talking about for a season or two. I'm not talking about 5 years, 6 years, or whatever. I'm talking about moving the chains. I'm talking about taking some of the pressure off of a guy like a Geno Smith. I'm talking about, even though it's not free agency, when you talk about Steve Smith, who ultimately might be a casualty because of free agency, you got to clear some cap space.
Okay.
If I'm the Jets, I'm looking at somebody like that, okay? Those are the kind of things that I think about. There is something to be said for experience. There is something to be said for somebody that's been there before and know how to do it. Where the mistake comes in is, like you said, when patience is not exercised, when you feel the need to rush in, be gung-ho, and then you throw a boatload of money and excessive years at an individual. But there are bargains to be made with these guys. You don't necessarily have to underpay them either. You can. There are guys that are worth 2 years and 13, 15 million. There are guys that are worth 2 years and $20 million. They may not be worth 5 years, but they could give it to you for 2. I look at a guy like Maurice Jones-Drew, and I say to myself, a year or two? Absolutely. He could come out there and he can do some things. A guy like Steve Smith, 34 years of age, in the kind of shape that he's in, as experienced as he is, you don't want to take that locker room presence away from Cam Newton and those boys, but you might need it in New York. You never know. I'm simply saying to you that we have to sit there and take into account. You can't hold against guys.
No.
In terms of, what I mean by that is, if you're going to sit there and say they're a locker room presence and this is the capability they have for a couple of years, you don't forget that come free agency. Because if your team needs that, then that's value. That matters. You need somebody that's going to get in somebody's face and be ready to hit somebody if you lollygag in practice. Or you're not showing up on Sunday, or you allowing your off-the-field stuff to be a distraction, but you're still productive.